Hey there, future aviators. Learning aircraft systems is one of the most complicated parts of learning to fly and something that is often overlooked. So today, let's take a look at aircraft engines and their components. I'm standing in front of an A model Cessna 182, which has a Continental O-470 engine. Okay, that's great, but what do all these numbers and things mean? Well, the first part of that is Continental. That's the manufacturer. Generally, there is Continental and Lycoming engine manufacturers in general aviation. The second part of that, the O, that means that it is a horizontally opposed engine, meaning the cylinders run laterally back and forth like this with the crankshaft in the center. Now you'll also see some engines that have an I in front of that O, so it's an IO whatever. What that means is that it's a fuel injected engine as opposed to one like this, which is carbureted. And the second part of it, the 470 in this case, this is a 470 cubic inch engine. Now this particular engine is a 6-cylinder engine, but most of your common trainers, your Cessnas and Pipers are all going to have a 4-cylinder engine, which is what your O320s and O360s are going to be. But how does this engine work? Let's start with the basics and show you each of the components that make it run and give you a better understanding. I do want to preface this with the fact that because this is a big engine, where the components are located are likely going to be a lot different than what you're going to see on your normal trainers. In the 6-cylinder engine like this, most of the major components are located on the back of the engine here, whereas in a Lycoming O320 or O360, most of those things, with the exception of the magnetos, are located on the front of the engine. So let's start with, how does the engine run? How does it get its spark? Well, the first place you have to start is right here on top, and those are the magnetos. These are connected to the engine, so when the engine is turning, they generate power and send that electrical energy through the spark plug wires here to the spark plugs. But of course, the mags can't generate any electrical energy if the engine isn't turning, so when it's shut off like this, how do you do that? Well, the answer is with the starter, which on this engine is located right here. It's difficult to see on this engine, so I can't really show you, but the starter has a gear that's connected to the flywheel, and so when you engage the starter, it engages the flywheel, which in turn turns the engine over. When this happens, the mags start turning, and they start generating power. And again, they send that electrical energy to the spark plugs. And unlike car engines, piston aircraft engines have 2 spark plugs, one right here on the top of the engine and another one right here on the bottom. Having dual spark plugs serves 3 purposes. One of those reasons is redundancy. So if one of those spark plug fails, then you still have the other one to allow that cylinder to produce power. The second reason is to produce more power. The bigger the bang, the more power you're going to have. And the third reason is to produce a more even combustion. If you only have one spark plug in the center of the piston, your combustion isn't going to be nearly as even as it is in this case with the 2. But of course, spark alone isn't enough to make the engine run. You need a couple other critical things, that's fuel and air. So now that we know how this engine runs, let's show you a few of the other components just so you know what they look like. So let's start at the top of the engine. When you're going to start the airplane, you have to have fuel in the cylinder first, right? But how do you do that? Well, in a carbureted engine, you use the primer. So when you move the primer knob to send fuel into the engine, it pushes fuel through these lines and down here into the cylinder. Next thing we have here on top is the vacuum pump. If you have any vacuum instruments left in your airplane, then this is what operates them. Up here on top, we have a couple electrical components, which are a relay and a voltage regulator. And below that, we have the alternator, which of course is what keeps the battery charged and the electrical system going. And down here on the bottom, we have the carburetor, which is controlled by the throttle linkage here and the mixture linkage over here. This is also what the gasculator looks like. So it has this line that runs from the carburetor down to the gasculator, where it can then separate. And then of course you sump the fuel out of the bottom of it. And last, down here we have the exhaust that includes this shroud for carb heat. When you pull the carb heat knob inside the cockpit, it allows bypass air off the exhaust to flow through this tube into the air box and up into the carburetor. So hopefully now you know the basics of how a piston aircraft engine works, and I hope this helps you as you move through your training. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like this video if you did, subscribe if you haven't, and we'll see you on the next one.